Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Steps Podcast. This is episode 53, and today we have two very special guests. They're also good friends of mine, Andrea and Andrew. They are here to share a lot of exciting topics. As you guys know, my podcast is on all things real estate and ADUs, and they're going to talk about a very cool concept. But before we get there, I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their background, and kind of share their expertise, and then we'll dive into more about what they're going to do and how they're going to disrupt the ADU industry. So we can start off with Andrea Swan.
Hey, so Andrea Swan. I am fairly new to the real estate world, maybe in the last 3 or so years, is when I've got my license. So I've been in the real estate world in the sense of an owner and investor prior to that. But even before that, I have been in the nonprofit world for over 20 years. And what I do is I support fundraisers in the sense that I source out the wealth. So when the fundraisers are going to ask for money, I figure out who has the money, how much they have, who they know, and where did that money come from. And so I've been exposed to various nonprofits, from mostly higher education, and also some affordable housing nonprofits have been my clients over the years. And my exposure to that kind of made me start seeing more of like what else is out there. I do have a passion for affordable housing, and just seeing how to cut through the red tape of what a nonprofit does, because they're slow. You can ask for a grant, things are slow, but being in the for-profit side of it, hopefully can help speed it up. So that way I can marry in my passion for finding affordable housing and also trying to find clients to help them achieve their goals as well.
I like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the nonprofit because that's a space that I really don't know much about. So I'm very intrigued by that and want to kind of see how that plays a role in what you guys are doing now with the ADU broker side of it. So, but before we get there, we got to also introduce Andrew Slocum. Hashtag friend, hashtag mentor, hashtag ADU guru, geek, all of those.
Yeah, hi. Hey, Stephanie. Glad to be back. I was gonna look how long it was from the last one we did.
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like light years away, even though it could have been maybe 2 years. I don't
2 years?
know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it feels like a long time ago. Yeah, I'm Andrew Slocum. First and foremost, a housing advocate, advocating for more housing of all types, affordable housing, market rate housing, just more housing. The affordability is really, in my opinion, very simple. If there's more there, prices they go down. Simple economics. Also a real estate developer, owner, investor. I invest in other people's projects. I invest in my own projects. And I assist owners with whatever it is that they want. It could be building a rainbow entryway out of containers to their off-road park in the desert, to accessory dwelling units. After this call, we're going to work on a high-rise in downtown LA that has some vacant retail to turn it into an amenity space and some additional units. So almost a go-to on using state law and to repurpose space. And almost everything has some sort of housing involved in it as well. Because that's really, what I want to do is make more housing. And then as Andrea has moved into more of the real estate role instead of her just nonprofit role, our brokerage, ADU Brokers, where she is the broker, but a partnership with my company and my skill set, and then our nonprofit Southern California Obtainable Housing, and that, yeah, I think. Also, have about 600 units of affordable housing that's in entitlement in the city of LA.
Mic drop with that last one. By the way, 600 units. Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful concept here with both of you guys and wanting, like, with both of your guys' knowledge, right? Andrea coming from the nonprofit, Andrew working in the profit, and then you guys coming together to, and I'm going to have you guys really talk about it because I don't want to really say what you guys are doing, but I'm all for it. And I think it's something that not a lot of people have thought things through in the marketplace. As you guys know, I'm very involved in the ADU space. So I see what contractors are doing, what architects are doing, what real estate agents are doing, and everybody's trying to figure out how they can team up and collaborate. Some are very successful at doing it, but I think you guys have really cracked the code as far as like streamlining the entire process, keeping it all in-house with what you guys are thinking of doing. But I know that there's the nonprofit side, right? And I'll go back to Andrea about this. Like, what really inspired I know that you mentioned it a little bit about the nonprofit, just seeing that side of the lens. What kind of really made you make that switch, right? And say, you know what, I should become a broker. I should really start this on the brokerage side and marry the two, like you said, the nonprofit and profit together.
Well, it kind of came about because I was ready for an industry change. I've been doing this for over 20 years and I love what I'm doing, but there's only so much growth and I love to be challenged. And I fell into what I'm doing now, or this nonprofit world, because I was waiting to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. And then I kept finding more challenges and more challenges. So I need that sense of being challenged in order to thrive. And I wouldn't say I was getting static, but I was just ready for another change. I'm like, all right, what's a new thing? And so I tried my hardest when Andrew was across the way in our home office and talking about real estate. I'm really good about staying in my lane. And I would try to keep my fingers in my ears. Like, nope, I don't need to learn about this. This is not my world. That's his world. We're going to keep it separate. And then when I became an investor and being more exposed to the real estate, and then I started listening a little bit more. I started going to conferences with him and some of the meetups, and I realized I need to know what he's saying and have a true believing behind it too. And so then I started learning more about it because I'm like, okay, well, this could be interesting. And then it moved to the next step of, I think during the pandemic needed something to do. And I'm like, well, now's the time. So that's when I started obtaining some licenses. So I studied and I got my loan originator license. Then I got my salesperson real estate license. Then I got the brokerage license. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do with all these?
This is a lot, by the way, like to do in a short period of time. I mean, I was going for my brokers and I think I started the NMLS, but I haven't finished either one. So like you did all three.
Yeah.
during COVID, out of being locked down, like you were pretty productive with your time.
It was difficult, but it was also fun in a sense. And I also got to the point of like, well, what's my next license I'm going to get? But I'm like, no, right. let's stay focused. Let's see what I can do with this brokerage. And then I started paying more attention. And then I could hear when Andrew was like, he's heading up these affordable housing programs, pilot programs for different cities. You can only listen more. Like, so I had to expose myself. And I'm like, well, maybe I can marry these two. I have a unique skill set in the nonprofit. I handle a lot of data. I'm more in the data analytics side of it. So I thought, well, there's got to be a different way to approach real estate. So that's what kind of got me more interested into trying to marry the two and in a sense, making a big jump. Like, all right, I'm ready for this true industry jump. Let's just change fully. I haven't fully quit the full-time job, but I will soon and jump all the time, full-time into the real estate world. And just trying to see how how can I guess go about it with a different lens, a different perspective, because I know in the real estate world, and I think we've all heard this because I've heard this too, the small time I've been in it, is this is how we do it. And this is the way it's supposed to be done. And I'm never a fan of hearing that as an answer. Like wasn't a fan when I started in my nonprofit world in the data analytics side. I was told to do it a certain way and I bucked the system. I'm like, no, that's not how I like doing it. Let's try it this way. So I'm already doing that with real estate. I've already been scolded by a real estate agent on my first ever close because I used different forms than she used. And right. My rationale is like, but I see nothing wrong with using these forms. Like these forms are supposed to be used for this. So we butted heads for a moment, but then at the end of the day, we shook hands and we're fine. But it's just, I'm trying to do that with the whole ADU mindset as well, like looking at real estate and stop doing it just because we've been doing it a certain way does not mean it's right. And so I think with that, the unique thing I can bring to the table is I haven't been molded a certain way. I'm taking it from my insight, my perspectives, my real life experience, and how I'm interpreting the language, the words that I'm reading, and trying to take that a different way. So hopefully I won't be pigeonholed to act a certain way with my clients. I can think outside the box because that's how I love to do anyways. And that's how I'm going to take this ADU brokers and how I'm going to approach it.
I love that because you are disrupting the market in a sense, right? And disrupting also the way realtors and brokers interact. Because you'll notice that in this business, I mean, you have a lot of I don't want to say entitled, but people who just want to do things a certain way because that's how they've been taught, or they just don't want to be open-minded to trying different things. I've had to deal with that on my side with a lot of just dealing with realtors, and like when I position myself as the ADU expert or ADU realtor go-to, I've had a lot of pushback, right, and a lot of transactions, but it's lack of knowledge or just them being set in their ways. And the way that I think most realtors and brokers sell real estate or transact when they're representing buyers and sellers is also very old fashioned. So it's nice to hear that, you know, you're bringing that perspective and that approach, right, to the marketplace, because I think that's what we need. I mean, that's what ADUs are kind of doing too in the housing industry. They're disrupting it. So you guys have figured out a way with your nonprofit background and with Andrew's expertise in development, multifamily, everything coming together to now, you know, I don't know which one of you wants to touch on this, but how did you guys, with obviously now hearing Andrea and then hearing Andrew, you guys came up with the concept of ADU brokers. And so what does ADU brokers mean? Like whoever wants to answer that question. What is ADU brokers?
I mean, I'll say why it became very clear that this needs to happen is I have been working with many brokers and agents that just don't get it, or they list, oh, you could do X, X, and Y, but you really can't. And it showed that there's this massive hole in the market. And then on the other side, I do 6 to 9 months, maybe a year's worth of work. And then some agent comes and just capitalizes on that and sells the property for 10x what we made from doing all this work to create this additional value. So it showed that, okay, there's not only this knowledge demand for that, because there aren't very many agents like you, Stephanie, that understand this at all. I mean, I don't know any other ones besides you, really. You know, we have, you know, almost everybody that's involved in this in one room right now. So there's not a whole lot of people, at least that we're aware of, right? And so as Andrea was getting her licenses, we're like, okay, how do we combine these two on our for-profit side and on the nonprofit side? And as we were coming up with our website, it's also like, okay, what services do we want to offer? And that's where we kind of came up with like 3 different options. And these options come from different agents and brokers that have come to me saying, can you do this? Can you do that and that? So, you know, for like say option one is you're either a buyer or a seller and you want to figure out what additional value you can have from your property. There was a property in West Hollywood that a bunch of people that I know, investors, lost out on because they did not know that you could add 10 more, I think it was 10 more ADUs there. And so the person who won it bid that much more and be like, they're crazy. But they weren't crazy because they added all these units to it. So, you know, pairing that knowledge then with Andrea coming in for the brokerage side is you know, that first part, like that's the first level of service. The next level of service would be, okay, we want to capitalize on that value instead of just selling it with the potential. What if we sell it with what we call as RTI plans? And this happens all the time in the development world, is that the plans have been submitted, it's ready for permit ready, because that part is sometimes harder and takes more time than the actual work to build it, right? So
Right.
say you're a first-time homeowner, you can just come in and buy a property that has plans ready to go so you can build that additional unit. and that for either the buyer to understand that, or for the seller to not have to have that, and the seller can capitalize on that additional value. We figure it's something like 3 to 5 times more in value than what you pay to have it done. So say you pay $10,000, it could potentially be $50,000, or I mean, it's bigger numbers than that, but that's how much more value it is. And then the third option is just all the way through. Like, Andrea will help you find the property, or if you're going to sell your property, and this happens all the time in multifamily properties, you had a rec room or some room that's been a unit the whole time and you never legalized it. We'll take it all the way to the end and have it permit ready, so you get the full value of that while Andrea is marketing the property for sale.
Yeah, and for those who maybe this went over your head, right? Basically what he's saying is he's figured out a way, or they both have figured out a way to streamline the entire process from A through Z, right? So if you're let's say at a very basic level, you're a buyer who wants to buy a property with the intention of building or converting an ADU, they will help you from the get-go, like before you actually go and start looking at homes. With Andrea's data driven personality, she's going to look at the property and see what's feasible before you even go out there. I can't tell you how huge of a value prop that is. Whereas most realtors just go show you whatever you're pre approved for and whatever you can afford within your budget. Here, you guys are really advisors, right? And really analyzing an existing portfolio or a future potential portfolio for a buyer who just wants to buy a property with the intention of building, right? And then you guys help them streamline that entire process from the design phase to the construction. And then hopefully eventually, I think you guys will add the property management component to it, which I think is something that I see coming as a big issue in the future, because there's what's happening is a lot of homeowners who want to build or are in the process of building didn't put thought into that. You want to build an ADU, but now you have to understand architectural plans. Now you have to understand construction. Now you have to understand financing and property management. And you didn't put thought into any of that. And so who can you trust that will walk you and guide you through that entire process? And I think that's like the how you guys are disrupting the market is being able to streamline all of that and keeping it in-house, right? With Andrea as a broker acting on both sides, and she has Andrew, right next to her, who's guiding her through the development phase, the feasibility options, and that's at a very basic scale. Sometimes when I'm talking to sellers, many times I'll walk away without the listing, and most realtors are like, "What? You're walking away without the listing?" Like, that their mentality again, like Andrea said, it's just they're so used to selling property a certain way, so they're like, I'm going to a listing appointment, I'm ready to sell this property or do a 1031 exchange. In my mind, I'm going in there to open up their mindset to, hey, maybe you don't need to sell this property. Maybe you just need to figure out highest and best use. Maybe we can convert that garage or build a 2-story. Now you can rent both of them out, rent out the garage and the main house, and use that income to then buy you your next property. And now you do get the purchase. So I didn't walk away with the listing, but I walked away with probably multiple purchases because I've opened up their mindset, and now that client's going to work with me on growing their portfolio, and I'm growing with that client. And I think that's the missing link. There's not a lot of people like us that think that way. Now on the higher scale, right, I think that that's even more valuable is people who want to buy or currently have a 10 unit, a 20 unit. You guys are able to also help them visualize what's potential, like what's feasible, what can they build, what does that process look like? Because it's already difficult, right, to convert a garage, and explaining that to your typical homeowner or first-time investor. Now, speaking in units terms, I mean, that's where Andrew comes into play. And I think it's just great, like what you guys are doing, keeping it all in-house. There's a big miscommunication, just like there is between contractors and architects. There's also a big miscommunication with realtors not knowing who to refer their clients out to, because many times they don't understand the process themselves, and or they haven't vetted the right person, which is kind of what led me into this whole path of really knowing my shit when it came to ADUs, right? Is I didn't vet the right person at the beginning, and that taught me, like, okay, you need to understand what it is that you're you're tapping into and what you're selling and what you're referring out to. So the fact that you guys are keeping it all in-house, I think if anybody, walks away with anything out of this podcast, it's the fact that you have an ADU brokerage, and that's not something that you see. Most people are referring the business out, but there isn't a one-stop shop where you can actually be held, from A through Z, like really A through Z. So I love that. I did have a couple other questions. We talked about the nonprofit. We talked about ADU development, kind of what inspired you guys. Maybe Andrew, you can talk a little bit more about the pilot program and kind of share some insights and knowledge about that.
Yeah. So the idea behind really starting the nonprofit was as I manage for those who don't know, I manage the city of West Hollywood's ADU loan program, where the city gives you a very low interest loan, up to $200,000 per unit. I think it's like 3% interest for West Hollywood. Same thing in Pasadena, 1% interest loan. And then you also get the assistance of our team as developers to guide you through the way to build an affordable unit. The pilot program is that. And as Andrea touched on, like the timeline and the speed of things, it was kind of frustrating for me because through these cities, over the course of 2 to 3 to 4 years, 4 or 5 units got built, while me privately have done 100 or something like that in the same time frame. So what the goal is to apply for the same tranche of money that cities have, and as a nonprofit, we're eligible for that, and then expand this program to where we're able to do almost the same program. And if you look up the City of West Hollywood ADU pilot program or Pasadena's second unit program, you can get the idea of that, but offer it up to anyone in Southern California that hits the metrics that is required. And it's hard to really say what that is because the pool of money from the state will dictate how much you have to earn or what you have to do with it. But the idea is, as financing is extremely hard for ADUs, that many people either know, but also ADUs are affordable by right, but they're not necessarily what we call deed restricted affordable housing, where you have to make sure that it is to someone that is desperately in need of that. And so that's what we want to do, is take the 2 pilot programs that are almost no longer pilot programs and expand it to Southern California so that people can apply for this tranche of money, and then also provide housing for the people that need it the most, our workforce, in areas that the housing just isn't there for them. So that's the idea behind the nonprofit. The application process is going to be a little bit later this year. And given that it's through the state of California, it'll probably be a year or so before they even, give us our feedback. But this is like a long time frame of what we're looking for. But we want to, that's the goal for the nonprofit and the pilot program, to make it a much larger in scale.
Yeah, and I think that's a great incentive and option for those struggling with the financing option, because as we mentioned, I think you and I can both agree, and I see your Instagram stories all the time with, well, number one problem is having to educate the people with the city about the ordinance itself. It's like this constant battle of having to educate them on what is allowed based on the ordinance. And so that creates a whole job on its own. The second one is the financing. And maybe not so much on the multifamily side, because typically these people have the capital through other assets, or they're just leveraging capital on a higher scale. But your average homeowner or average investor who has a couple doors in the residential space, 9 times out of 10, they're struggling with financing. Unless HELOC is an option, the other ones you have to get creative. I have one right now where it's a high school friend of mine, and her father-in-law is actually doing a reverse mortgage so that he can fund the ADU project for her. And I thought that was kind of cool and very creative, right? That's a very creative way of doing it, but you do have to think outside the box in order to fund these projects, which, is the issue. Like, most people want to build because they want to offset their mortgage. They want mom and dad to live behind them, or the kid coming back from school or recreational or whatever the case is. But there isn't a lot of financing options available. So having things like the pilot program or the ADU grant is good. Now, does that pilot program also cover construction, or is it more of like the pre soft cost?
It would be all the way through to construction. Yeah.
That's pretty
So
cool.
it would take care of soft costs. If we could mirror it with the if the state ADU grant comes back, if they get more funding, would love to do that. But it's not,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be the icing on the cake. We're going to make it so that it takes you all the way to the end, and absolutely right. That was part of the reason why Andrea also got her MLO license, is knowing like, okay, that's another vertical that we have to solve. No one does it better than you for what you need. And it was so difficult reaching out to people. I mean, this just happened to us yesterday, that we had a loan that we were waiting for. And then like before we're about to sign it, the terms just change. And it's like that transparency. It's like, it's so difficult for people. And these are like, we're seasoned investors, and it's still so difficult. I can't even imagine people who are like relying on this to buy their first investment property, and they have to come up with an extra 150,000 tomorrow or whatever they may be, because they just changed. And so adding that vertical with the lending, as well as like where we're trying to position all of these services to where one-stop shop, and you get someone that and you can trust all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, once you guys figure out the financing, it's game over, because that's really where people need to start. I always tell this to my clients when we first start off, whether they're looking to buy or sell, right? Because if you're doing a 1031 or you're just simply selling, you're moving somewhere else. So you've got to also figure out the financing for the next property. You got to figure out financing first. I know I talked to Andrew offline, and on the multifamily side, you don't have to worry much about that. But on the residential side, anything that you're doing transactional, you're most likely not buying it cash, right? You're financing a portion of it, or you're financing something. And so I always tell clients, first, let's figure out the financing, then we reverse engineer and we build based on what you can fund, because that's the better route, right? You don't want to like try to build something and then later on try to chase the funding for it when you don't even know if it's available to you or not. So the fact that Andrea also has her NMLS, I mean, you guys are ready, right? Ready for that next ADU financing option to come about, and then really be a full in-house team that services the client and becomes more of, like I said earlier, an advisor rather than a transactional based brokerage, which I think is what's also missing. Like most brokerages, just like realtors, are also just one way. They're very uh, they've been operating in a very ancient way, just like the MLS, just like the cities, just like HOAs, just like escrow companies, right? And so there has to be some sort of disruption in the industry, and I really like what you guys are doing. I did have another question for Andrew. With sustainability becoming increasingly important, how do you integrate eco-friendly practices into ADU designs and development? That was
You
another
know,
question I had.
yeah, it's difficult when you're building small boxes to really, because you don't have a lot of options, especially when you're doing affordable options. But we take a lot of care I mean, California itself is already very high level on what the minimums are. So if you compare what California requires
Mhm.
you to do for eco-friendly and take that to another state, this is above and beyond exponentially. California's minimum is very high. But we're looking at things like different types of insulation, and all of our units now are all electric, which people are saying like, oh, where does that come from? But implementing all electric and then solar at the same time. So now they're not just solar ready. We are putting solar panels on all of our projects, putting those things together and really making sure that the building itself is as close to what we call net zero, so that whatever energy it takes in, it also produces and it keeps it as well. So building an envelope that doesn't allow a lot more extra heat or air coming in, so that they stay uh, a lower impact. And And outside of that, accessory dwelling units are eco-friendly, especially conversions, because you are taking a space and materials that already exist. You're not building something new. You're not cutting down new trees. You're building on something that already exists. Higher density is more ecologically friendly. Excuse me, not economically. In the sense that if you have a large swath of single family homes, they all need water, power, and electricity, and that's all generated for one home at a time. Where this is adding density in one area, and that water is going to one area, and on an environmental impact, higher density is much more sustainable than a million single family homes spread out over 70% of LA, which is embarrassing.
Yeah, it really is.
It's really embarrassing. Yeah.
And I'll say, I mean, that's good that you guys are putting thought to that. And I agree with you that California is eco-friendly, like compared to other states, because yeah, our minimum is, what did you say? Our minimum is pretty high. So I think the reason why I asked that question is, well, I'm now starting to see a lot of that because I'm renting out a lot of ADUs in Orange County. And I think as an investor and a landlord, if you're having thoughts of building an ADU with the intention of, you should consider dividing utilities from the get-go. And if you add eco-friendly amenities to it, you'll get a higher rent because people are also looking for that, right? Most people are like working from home, especially people who are renting out an ADU. I find that if it's, for one or two people, they're most likely like operating from home as well, or they have some sort of hybrid model where they spend a lot of time at home. So having these eco-friendly amenities, you can charge more rent, and then also make sure that the utilities are divided, so you don't have to think about how are we going to split that, or am I going to factor that into the rent, which is what the issue I'm having right now. Like, people are calling me that they want to rent out their ADU. They didn't use me for the build out or consulting, but I'm like, okay, so what about utilities? And they're like, we pay for utilities. And I'm like, so what's the average utility for the last 12 months? How do we factor that in? Do you know how much the ADU spends in utilities on its own, right? And most of them don't. And so I think that's a big factor too. Again, they don't put thought into it because they weren't thinking of being a landlord. They didn't think about management, right, and dealing with the tenant. So these are all good things to consider. And then my last question, you guys answered it, was going to be, as co-founders of ADU Brokers, what sets your brokerage apart from the industry? And we've been talking about disruption, but if there's anything you guys want to add to it, I think you guys have shared a lot, but anything else you guys would want to add as to how ADU Brokers is really going to disrupt the industry?
So you touched on what you do. Like, your approach is you will walk through it with a client, potential clients, and maybe not get the listing. I have the same approach, what I've done with my whole career, and which I assume I'm going to do it in this ADU broker, and I will do in the ADU broker, is I'm not just trying to sell you as me being your brokerage. I want to teach you. I want you to learn from it, because it builds that trust. So imparting wisdom does not mean that someone's going to go off and go succeed on their own. It just means that maybe they're going to come to you for guidance. Maybe it's future clients that will carry on, or maybe it's word of mouth. But that's going to be the difference here. Is it's not just the goal of trying to get your business and just make money. It's going to be, how can I make it better for you? How can you learn, and how can you, I guess, just build that trust that we're trying to give you, because this is not a secret. It's all out there. Andrew has a skill set of finding this information. I'm lucky enough to have him as an in-house mentor, so I'm going to impart that wisdom as I can, and I think that's going to be a different approach than other brokerages.
I agree, and I would add to it that your data analytics background too is going to be crucial, because a lot of this is data driven at the end of the day, right? Although we push for ADUs and it's going to help housing, but does it pencil out for you and your goals specifically at the end of the day? And I think you're going to be great at that. You'll probably become really good at comping out ADUs, which is another way to really like set yourself apart, because that's been the biggest struggle, is how do you, come up with the ARV after the build out? What's the after value going to be once you convert that garage? And, you have to look at data in the MLS, but not all realtors add the correct data, the right square footage, the projected rents. So it's very hard, even for appraisers, to evaluate what the ARV is going to be. So I see you also playing a role in advocating towards that, especially being so data driven. But yeah, I mean, being data driven, understanding development, coming from the nonprofit world, like all of the background that you guys share is really going to set you guys apart from other brokerages. And I can see you guys growing a team of realtors. I don't know if that's part of your guys' goal, but you guys have me in your corner as well as support always.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.
You guys are like, hell no, we're not ready for realtors. Let me figure it out first.
I mean, I think I'm incredibly lucky to have both of you, to learn from you, Stephanie, on your processes, and looking as someone who, you're right, most of the real estate agents, and even where I started from, don't want to know this stuff. Like, it's better to just like not know, because they're like concerned about maybe saying the wrong thing or liability. I don't know what it is. I'll never understand openly turning away from knowledge, right? That I'll never
Right.
get that. And having Andrea, I mean, you don't know this, but I say stuff that she said all the time. Like, I'm copying what she said, because she's just an expert in what she does. So it's made the professionalism that came from me came from her, because she's a beast and a boss when it comes to, getting things done. And I'm glad that we're cohesive instead of on the other side, because I would be scared, in a sense, let's see. There's some other stuff happening, like where ADUs are going to play a bigger role in larger development. There's some decisions that the state has made that aren't public yet, that ADUs will be counted towards what you can do on a larger picture. So you may be using ADUs to build a 5-story building as a count, and things like that. So this insider knowledge is, as housing advocates and as brokers, also play into the bigger picture of creating affordable housing and housing in California. So really what we want to do is share that knowledge with people in our mission to create more housing, and have a resource as an advisor that you can trust, that knows what they're doing and can achieve it and get it done. Because it's one thing in theory to say it, but then when you get an email from a city staff planner that says, no, you can't, you really have to know what you're doing, or it's not going to work out very well for you.
Yeah, that's like the pivotal moment there. Right? There's really where you get to show your magic is, do you have the patience to actually pull through with the project? I think a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into that either. Both the owner, the investor, and the company, architect, contractor, whoever it is, many of them won't get the job done, and that makes us look bad, right? In any aspect, like there's a lot of realtors that are bad apples, just like contractors, just like architects, everything. But when you have good intentions and you have really good background and strong knowledge in the concept, then you should be good. You're good to go, just vetting out the right people. But I'm super grateful to have both of you guys in my corner. Andrew knows how much I appreciate our relationship and just guiding me through my current transition, which is from residential to multifamily. And a lot of it comes from lack of confidence. But one thing I am grateful for is that just like I threw myself into the ADU world, I'm doing the same with multifamily, and I'm not scared. I feel empowered being surrounded by the right people. So I think like one thing to walk away with from this podcast is vet the right people, surround yourself with people that like, and trust, and that you think are a good fit for you. And if Andrea and Andrew seem like a good fit, reach out to them, whether it's a small garage conversion, right? Or maybe it's a 100-unit building and you're trying to figure out how you can convert existing space. 50 units and you want to sell it off to buy something that has more potential to convert existing space, or maybe a tear down or whatever. Like he even talked about some crazy container projects right out in Joshua Tree or whatever. Reach out to them and have a consultation, have a conversation, and pick their brains on where they can sort of help you with their lens, right? And really excel and help you grow your portfolio and grow your assets. And I'll leave it with that. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.